Nathaniel Lee. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank each and every one of you for joining our show each week. We have a lot of people that I think that our show probably have the most intelligent listeners of any group. Our listeners research the subject matter and are able to bring information that is very helpful, sometimes controversial. But our call-in number is 833-653-3529 or 463-204-0419. Again, 833-653-3529. My superstar panel today may be joining, but they're in seminars in different parts of the country. This week, we had a lot of interesting cases in the news, but one of the things that I thought that was becoming really controversial was the proliferation of these transgender bills that are popping up all over the country. And that was a subject matter that was not in my vernacular or that I knew a lot about. So I checked into it. So let's just briefly talk about it. Now, gender refers to a person's understanding of what their gender is or that they identify. Transgender is a term used to describe someone who identified with a gender that is different from their biological physical attributes or sexual traits. While people born either male or female chromosome, this does not necessarily dictate gender. Though these terms are commonly misunderstood, gender identity and sexual orientation are not the same. People oftentimes confuse gender and sexual orientation, but they're in fact two separate things. Gender is who you are. It is the internal feelings of being a man, a woman, or something outside the traditional binary understanding. Someone who is transgender does not feel that who they are on the inside matches their assigned gender on the outside. Sexual orientation, on the other hand, defines who you are or attracted to. People identify as gay, straight, lesbian, or otherwise as to their identity, male, female, or another gender. So these laws are popping up. Watching Montana, and where the transgender legislator was deeply upset, and they kicked the person out because of this bill that they were passing. And at the same time, in different parts of the country, we have the transgender litigation and going before state legislature. And then we see these abortion bills advancing or trying to advance. I saw that in South Carolina this week, the Republican women fought against it and it did not become law, a total abortion ban in South Carolina. So these legal issues are popping up all over the country and they're populating. Now, before I get into the next subject, here in Indianapolis, we have the mayor election this Tuesday. On top of that, we have the city council members all up for voting. And I think it's important that we have a better turnout this time around versus 8 or 9%. I was watching the number of, when I went to vote last Saturday at the Pike Library, it seemed like there was more volunteers out there handing out literature than voters. When I went inside, the whole process took me maximum 3-4 minutes because nobody else was there. And I was thinking to myself, man, oh man, these elections are important and people are not taking them seriously. I looked at the landscape in our city. We have issues, and there's a Republican who's running for office, who's a very wealthy gentleman, to spend $500,000 an ad, and his campaign is based upon the high number of shootings that we have here in Indianapolis. And I was thinking about that. I was thinking, man, this is an idiotic thing to say because it's your political party that polluted our cities with all these guns. We have this gun legislation whereby anybody could get a gun, mental disease otherwise, without any background check or license or registration. And so the problem is that because we have so many guns in our community, in the country now, I mean, America is 3% of the world population. In private gun ownership, we have 51% of all the private gun ownership in the whole world. So the net result, there's more people dying in America through gun violence than Russia taking over another country or these wars and stuff. We have more people getting shot because we have this large amount of guns. And then on top of that, we don't consider the fact that we have these high capacity magazine and weapons of mass destruction that used in war that are readily available, such as AK-47 and these automatic weapons. And you have to ask yourself, why on earth do people feel that it's necessary to have these weapons of mass destruction? And I'm scratching my head because you can't go out deer hunting or rabbit hunting or whatever type of hunt you do, and with an AK-47 or automatic rifle, 225 or any of these automatic weapons, what's the point? See, because if you start indiscriminately firing a weapon in different direction, bullets don't have an identification of who's the target. It's a person pulling the trigger. And so I'm concerned about that. So I think that when you hear politicians talking about the shooting in Indianapolis, there's a lot of blame to go around, but the number one blame in my mind is the fact that we allow the introduction of so many weapons on our cities and streets. They don't manufacture these weapons in the Black community. They're bought in and sold. And so we need to first look at responsible gun ownership. And because the city can't be safe without some type of reduction in these weapons. And now people, instead of resolving disputes like in the old days, you get in a fight, they throw a few knuckles, and then the next day they make up. That's not the case anymore. Now you throw a punch, then the next person follow with an automatic weapon. And so we have to be careful. And now we had a first note from Pierre. He said, crime is crime, but Republican legislators put these guns on the street, and a Democrat, they won't message that. That's correct. And Pierre, you're right about that, sir, and here's why. The Democrat messaging is really bad on key issues. Like, for example, we have the budgetary crisis coming up whereby we're threatened with the default of our debt. And what this amounts to is that the United States incurs bills, and then we have to extend the budgetary amount to make sure the bills are paid. So these are debts that are already incurred. Now, this is very important. Folks, the federal budget, if you trace back to 1929 when the stock market crashed, the budget deficit was zero. When Donald Trump took office in January 2017, it was like 21 trillion. In 42 months, the deficit went to $28 trillion. So the Trump presidency created 25% of the federal deficit that it took almost 90 years to do. He did it in 42 months. So now the Republicans in the House saying, we want to fight the deficit, but they created a deficit, 25% of it in 42 months. And so I think that people need to be aware of that. Now let's take a caller. Imhotep, you had a question or comment for us today, sir.
Oh, Brother Nate.
How you doing today, sir?
All right, good, Brother Imhotep here, and thanks for taking my call. I'll be brief. I want to throw a couple legal things your way and get your thoughts on these issues here. Number one, your thought on Disney's lawsuit against DeSantis. I spoke with my mother yesterday, and she thought it was. You got lawyers, you know that. Lawyer, my mother. Disney got some good lawyers because they're attacking him on free speech, on First Amendment grounds. I read through part of the first couple pages of the lawsuit, but I thought it's a brilliant strategy. Of course, DeSantis, retaliated verbally, publicly, hollering about it's all political. Well, what he's doing is political to them. And then I saw that the federal judge, Mark Fitzpatrick, had to recuse himself because he either was in a business relationship with some party, didn't say which side. But I want you to speak to these judges and these problems with these relationships and then these potential cases. We know what's going on in the Supreme Court right now, and then Clarence Thomas, and now they're talking about John Roberts and others. Number two, book bans. I'm reading Richard Wright's Native Son. I don't know why all these years I never have read it, but it's banned in Florida, Texas, South Carolina, Virginia, and all over. And we just passed a slight ban here on the LGBT or transgendered books. It didn't go into our, African American or history books, but I think that's a slippery slope. So that, and in Texas, a proposal to make schools display the 10 Commandments, to make schools provide time to read Bible or other religious books and prayer. It harkens back to when I was one of my political science classes back in school when we studied about West Virginia Board of Education versus Barnett, when Barnett them sued that they didn't prayer in classroom. People keep thinking that they took prayer out of classroom. You can pray or say a prayer to yourself all day long. The state just can't sanction it. Will you explain to black people, because people call in all the time on this network, thinking that they just took prayer out of school. People, go read West Virginia Board of Ed versus Barnett. There's a number of cases, but the most significant one is West Virginia Board of Ed versus Barnett. Can you explain to people this is why, even in their wrongness, those unfounding fathers, the separation of church and state and what was happening in England, why they drastically want to try to keep religion and politics separate? And thanks for taking my call, Brother Nick.
Well, there's a lot of subjects. I don't remember them all, but here's the key one. Walt Disney World is located in Central Florida, just southwest of Orlando. Walt Disney World generate about 1 million visitors to the theme parks each week, over 50 million per year. The Disney has certain legislation that given to about 1,000 other corporations in the state of Florida that allow them home rule. Like a small city can incorporate, and by incorporating, they determine local taxes, services, and things like that. And Disney has a similar type apparatus set up. Well, historically speaking, the Florida governor, Ron DeSantis, used the term woke, and everything that he disagreed with, he said woke legislation, woke culture, woke cooperation. And I think that first, most people don't really understand the detrimental effect of the term he's using. Woke had nothing to do with liberal or conservative. Woke had to do with what people said during slavery and lynching and things like that. You have to stay awake so you don't get murdered or lynched or killed by white supremacists or Klansmen or slave owners and things like that. So now we're taking the term woke, will stay awake and don't get slaughtered, to say that that's a bad thing. It blows my mind that somehow they could take this cautionary process, particular to Black folks, to save their life, and it's a bad thing. It, quite frankly, is insulting. And a lot of people are saying woke legislation, and it's catching on. And the people who are saying it are so ignorant to the ideology of the source of the information. And it's just definite to me that they use this to somehow make it a negative thing. Woke is a good thing in the sense that we need to stay awake and not get killed or otherwise slaughtered. Now, having said that, so when Disney says that the Don't Say Gay bill was a bad thing, the governor retaliated and decided to go after Disney. And then so it's been a lot of legal maneuvering. He decided to appoint a special board to punish Disney. Now, this is insane. Disney is probably the largest employer in the state of Florida. And they pay over $1 billion a year in taxes to the state of Florida. And that's just not count the effect on the Central Florida revenue. You have 1 million people staying in a hotel. They're spending millions of dollars each day in Florida, the airports, the bus terminal, rental car agency. That one engine drive the Central Florida economy. And so we have a governor goes after this important business entity just because they don't think that his position on human rights or gay rights or things like that, he disagreed with them, so he decided to go after the corporation. So what did they do? Well, when he had the legislature in Florida to pass this special rule before the term ended, the board passed their own agreement on and gave Disney World special protection for a significant time period. And so the Republican governor then trying to overturn that rights that didn't happen. Now you got to remember, the governor came on TV and said that they have this special rights, ignored the fact that there was 1,800 entities in Florida that had the same type governor right, not just count those, like small cities and towns in Florida have the same right. Disney is like a unique entity, but it's like its own city. And so the point is that they got outmaneuvered. Now, other part of this is that when Disney filed suit in federal court up in Tallahassee, in essence, you have a federal judge, but then the person that does discovery is generally a magistrate. And the magistrate judge, Martin Fitzpatrick, said he was related to one of the parties in the lawsuit, and that required his recusal from the case. So there's a federal judge, and then there's magistrate who is underneath the judge in terms of the hierarchy, in terms of how the legal process works. So that's the way the legal system should work. And I know that Emotech, in other words, concerned about Clarence Thomas on the U.S. Supreme Court. And that's such a radical departure of what we see in our justice system as to how a billionaire seemed to give him millions of benefits and is not reported. And then there's an allegation that there had cases before him because of that. So ordinarily, our legal system is sound, is ethical, and judges are doing a good job in general. And so the judge in that case in Florida recused himself. He identified an ethical conflict, and that was the appropriate thing to do. There's nothing unusual about that. It's a high-profile case, and so you don't want to be attacked if you're a judge based on the fact that you have some ethical conflict. Now, that's all I can remember because Emotech had so many different questions I couldn't remember all of them. Now, the Pierre was also correct about the debt ceiling. The debt ceiling had been raised many times before, and most recently under Donald Trump, when he was president, the Republican passed a law, a clean bill to raise the debt ceiling. And that's what you do in order to avoid the fault of the American economy. And the Republican passed a bill that is, instead of increasing the debt ceiling, they try to file a budgetary bill, which is quite different. So you should pass a clean debt ceiling bill, just allow the government to pay the bills already incurred so it doesn't default on the prior bills. And some of these bills were incurred when the Republican controlled the House, the Senate, and the presidency. And now the Republicans are balking at paying the bills that they created, which is insane. So as a practical matter, what we're hoping is that sane people get together and pass a quick debt ceiling bill, and then go back to fight another day about the specifics of the budget, which is a different issue. One of the things that, if you look at the federal budget, my biggest concern, quite frankly, is that the large amount of money we spend on the military. And I'm a big proponent of military spending, but I think it's getting out of control. I remember, I served in the service, but one of my close friend was the chief officer for a facility in the military. And I won't mention it specific, but when he told me how the military spent this money, if just hypothetically, if they're given, say, $500 million to spend each year, and they only spend $450, then they would create things to buy to spend the $500 million to show that they needed more money the next year. And so, and that disturbed me when I found out. And then when we looked at some of the bills that we got, like we had the war in Afghanistan, and they were charging these exorbitant sums of money just to wash clothes. I mean, it was something outrageous. You could look it up on the internet. But there were things like that that bothered me. And so when people are doing these budgets, they don't necessarily look at the actual numbers in the budget. And so what I do, I try to look at the budget to determine whether or not it makes sense. And one of the important aspect is that, Joe Biden announced he's running for president again. And our callers pointed out that the Democrats have very poor messaging, and they do. Particularly Biden, my biggest criticism is their messaging is real awful. The truth of the matter, in 2 years, Biden has accomplished more than any president been in office since Lincoln. Everybody forget that we had this massive pandemic, and how was it being managed before he took office? Well, it's like political malpractice. People were dying every day, 3,000 to 4,000 people, and they developed a process to the government had helped with the development of shots and things that people could take. But then the Biden allocated money to make sure that everybody got it faster, and that dramatically decreased the number of deaths in America. Also, they passed legislation to make sure that people didn't starve. And there's legislation, employment retention tax credit, to make sure businesses weren't abandoned. But there's over 100 different things they did to help people that most people don't pay attention to. And in every state now, we have massive construction projects going on everywhere. You can't go anywhere. Indianapolis, there's this $1 trillion infrastructure bill that Biden, they don't talk about, but they passed legislation so we can have this Build America to make sure things are going smoothly in terms of our roads, our bridges, and things like that. Then they passed legislation that I thought was very important to deal with prescription drugs. If you're on Medicare now, this year, your cost of drugs has been dramatically decreased. For those folks who unfortunately have type 2 or type 1 diabetes, your insulin drug was capped at $35, which is I've been in line at the pharmacy and I've seen some people trying to purchase drugs to keep them alive, and they're suffering because they're on fixed income. They don't have enough money to pay for the drugs. Because they don't have enough money, they're in more pain, more suffering. And so this federal relief that the Biden administration, they decreased the cost of drugs through Medicare. And most people may not realize how big a deal that is. Well, if you're a senior, then you realize that you are much better off with this type of legislation. This anti-inflation legislation, really, they did specific things that target people that needed this type of money the most. So if you're on fixed income, you have a reason to vote because you have somebody looking out for you. Also, one of the big issues is that they want to go after Medicare and Social Security. The Republicans were saying that we don't want to take away Social Security, but then they're trying to increase the retirement age up to 70. And a lot of my friends elected to start partial retirement at 62. Then some at 65, 66, 67. But rarely any of my friends elected to take retirement benefit at age 70. So net result is if the government forced you to take benefits at 70, a lot of people, life will be dramatically altered. And so these are important issues that the Biden administration has done, but they don't publicize it correctly. You know, Trump people, they took credit for stuff that they didn't really do, and they ignore the fact that they're talking about a budget. Well, their policy created 25% of the federal deficit in 42 months, 25% since 1929. And so I agree with my callers that this was just poor messaging, because I think that that's something that people should take a close look at. Now, we have a slew of other issues. I'm trying to get through some of them. The other issue has to do with some noteworthy litigation. This week, we had something that is very unusual. The former president of the United States, Donald Trump, has an ongoing trial in New York federal court where a woman stated under oath many times that he raped her in a store. And she's got a couple witnesses to back her up. And of course, a famous Hollywood tape where the former president talked about the things that he grabbed from women. And so it's just an incredible stain on America's political system. You know, when a politician was accused either accurately or falsely of rape, that ended their political career. A perfect example is Justin Fairfax out of Virginia. I knew Justin. He worked at the White House. He looked like he was a rising superstar, and he looked like he had a political resume that could eventually lead him to the White House even. He was talented, articulate, great president, and seemed like an ideal candidate. And then he became the lieutenant governor in Virginia. And what happened? Some women accused him of sexual assault. One was over 20 years old, and the other one was at a Democratic National Convention. And that was the end of Justin Fairfax's political career. 2 allegations of misconduct occurring many years ago. One allegedly occurred when he was in college. The second was at a political convention, and his political career was over. It was ended. And now with Donald Trump, is an aberration. He had over 20 of these allegations, and I don't know how much merit they had. I'm not advocating one way or another. I'm just saying these are allegations that were made, and he's still the Republican frontrunner for the nomination as a Republican candidate for president of the United States. And so we have a situation that's brewing that is unheard of in American democracy. Now, also, speaking of the former president, Donald Trump, we see that the vice president of the United States received a subpoena to testify about what happened on January 6, 2021. And January 6, 2021 represents the second time in American history that our Capitol was attacked. This Capitol attack resulted in the arrest of over 800 individuals, but it seemed like to me it was about 4,000 or 5,000 people entered it. And so there's a lot of people that are unaccounted for. But the former Vice President Mike Pence was forced to testify at a grand jury hearing this week, investigate the insurrection that occurred on January 6, 2021. The Vice President of the United States I repeat again, testified this week in a grand jury process. The grand jury is a secret process where the government attorney present evidence to a jury pool of this interested individual to ascertain whether or not a crime has been committed and the person who is the target of the grand jury, in fact, committed the crime. So if the grand jury in DC, folks, subpoena the vice president of the United States to come before the grand jury, I concluded that the target of the grand jury, since they wanted Mike Pence to testify, and they made objection as terms of the presidential privilege, that the target of the grand jury had to be Donald Trump. That was just my opinion, because who else would they need to testify if he's not talking about Donald Trump? Because the other people already testified about what Giuliani and all these other lawyers were doing, and they've since been suspended from practice, most of them, except, they've had legal issues abound. So I don't know where this grand jury is headed, but in American history, I don't remember, since I've been a lawyer, ever seeing an event where the vice president of the United States is subpoenaed to apparently give testimony against the president of the United States, Donald Trump. It's just an extraordinary chain of events. And regardless of whether or not he's indicted, it's just the fact that this happened is such a monumental occurrence, something I've never witnessed in my 42 years of being a lawyer. So we'll see the outcome of this event. We will determine whether or not this event leads to the prosecution of the former president of the United States. And I can tell you right now, it's a sad day in American democracy, because the president of the United States is a special office whereby you want a person with good citizenship, respect the rule of law of the country. And the president of the United States is the chief law enforcement official, in the sense that he appoints the FBI, he appoints the CIA, he appoints all the government oversight people that control the prosecution of people in the federal system. And yet, the fact remains is it appears that he's a target of potential criminal prosecution, President of the United States. So he got a rape case pending, corporation got convicted of numerous crimes, and then it get worse. In Georgia, we had a terrible thing happen in Georgia during the presidential election. That we had the then sitting president call the Secretary of State in Georgia, and based on the recorded conversation, he seemed to suggest that he was telling him to create some additional votes, I think 11,000 some odd votes, in order to win the election that he had lost. So you had this massive special grand jury by the prosecutor in Fulton County. And there was indication just this week that local law enforcement officials were advised to be on alert this summer based upon potential indictments. And so in the next 3 months, there is, based on the scuttlebutt, and this is all speculation, not factual, because nobody on the outside can know for certain because the Fulton County Prosecutor's Office have not leaked information as to what they plan to do. Now, the evidence in the Georgia case has been the same evidence that's been there for a year and a half. So in my mind, I'm trying to figure out why does it take them so long to process this information? We had the people in Georgia following the presidential election, they recorded the phone calls. So we're not speculating about what happened. We have recorded phone conversations of the President of the United States and these actors. They're on recording, so we know exactly what they said. So if we have these recordings and we have so much of the information televised, if we have people giving statements, why is it taking so long to arrive at a conclusion? And that's the only thing about the case that's baffling to me. In my mind, it's just taking way too long. Not criticism, it's just factual to me in the sense that what evidence that you need today that you didn't have access to 12 months ago. And the problem that I'm having is the issues surrounding the election, these criminality issues, it looked like they won't be settled before the next presidential election. It's likely that all these things may go into 2025. And, justice in our system of government requires accountability for one's action. And criminal justice means that the government has the right and obligation to make sure that this axiom that no person is above the law, no man is above the law, is enforced. So if the then President of the United States promoted or engaged in a series of felonies, then justice requires that action be taken to uphold the law. Now, what's at stake in this process is American democracy. I, like many of you, watched in horror of what happened on January 6, 2021. I was watching TV and I was taken aback at the sheer violence that I saw being televised. I saw what looked like a takeover of the American democracy. Now, to his credit, Mike Pence, who was then the vice president, took steps that protected democracy. So I give him a big shout out for doing that. We had a process where individuals appear to be thinking that they can overthrow an election, overthrow democracy. Democracy is dependent upon having fair elections. So the cornerstone of our democracy is based on the idea that we have free and open election. And so each time that there's an election, I urge each and every one of you to show up and vote, and do some research on the candidates. I do research on each candidate I vote for. And I think people should do that. Now, Pierre, you have a question or comment for us today, sir?
I just have a comment. You can hear me good, right?
Yes, sir.
I just have a comment. People in the United States take American democracy for granted. I mean, we get up and we go about our business. We go to our jobs. We go here and there, and we make plans to do this, that, and the other. But people really don't understand what it's like to live in a lawless society. And I work with people that have come from a lot of countries across the world, and they can tell you, living day by day, the threats, no support whatsoever, people starving, people fighting, people getting killed. Folks just don't realize how this country can descend into that type of lawlessness. And when you say, well, going after Trump is good and it should happen, and I believe it. But like I said, even right here in this town, nobody's above the law. But it just depends on who you are. And, that's a sad case right here in Indianapolis. Won't get into it, but so, you're right. Really need, and black people need to vote. We're just not voting. And, I voted for Robin Shackelford. This time around, I'll give Joe Hogsett my vote in the fall if he wins. But, nobody's rocking these election sites. And, people don't care until something calamitous happens. Then they want accountability. And like I said, the Democrats do need to do a better messaging on what we've done. And if Vice President Harris has to be that, she needs to do that, because right now I haven't seen her doing anything really. And
you talking about Kamala Harris? You talking about the Vice President?
Yeah, she could be out there preaching the Democratic gospel about what we've done, what Biden's have accomplished. She can attack Trump. She can tell the American people how we run up the debt under Trump. She can, all across the country, Republicans are talking about crime. Crime is bad, but Republicans are throwing all these guns on the street. And, cops are getting shot and blown away,
Hey, Pierre, but here's something you need to know. I get those briefings from the vice president and the president on a daily basis. And when I look at her congested schedule, she's doing some wonderful things. But you know what? The national news don't cover all these events that the vice president is doing. So therefore, everybody don't think she's doing anything because it's not being covered. Meanwhile, every news organization talk about Trump, Trump, Trump. Every day is filled with Trump stories, right? So he's in the news and he takes all the options out of the room. Therefore, you don't get the reporting of what the vice president is doing. So I can send you the itinerary. I mean, it's amazing some of the things she's doing in the United States and foreign country, but it doesn't get press coverage. And because of that, people under the erroneous ideology that she's doing nothing, which is a false premise.
She needs to step up her social media game then. I mean, the press they're not gonna cover her, So she's got to step it up on the social media aspect, and push the message. I mean, come on now, you got to try harder. But hey, thanks for taking my call, Nate.
Okay, next, producer, let's take a few calls off the line. Who's the next caller, please? Guy? Hello? Did we lose our caller? Hello, Guy? I can't hear you.
Yeah, I kind of agree with what Pierre is talking about. Back in the day, it seems like we had much more excitement about the elections. But now you hardly hear about where to go to vote. That kind of thing is just not. And understand that in the primary, it's about the parties. They want to get slated, basically elected. At the same time, we have a lot of younger people maybe voting for the first time that don't know the ins and outs. Just the preliminaries. I think that we can't necessarily rely on the parties to, the independents have to be more active, I think, in terms of education, voter education, kind of thing. And also, we have a situation now that's going to affect a lot of people, talking about the debt limit, whether or not debt limit should be raised. A lot of people don't even know what that's all about, what Congress is doing. And the Republicans basically making their point in terms of trying to throw a monkey wrench in things any way they can. There's the current presidential administration. But pitching on to what Pierre was saying, Democrats have to do more to try to get their message out. And if the so-called commentators, the press, doesn't do their job, they got to, put a fire under the press so that they do their job.
Well, Pierre was right about one thing. The vice president, I get the briefing each day, and she's doing some extraordinary things, but her publicity is not being shared nationally. So therefore, people have a mistaken impression like she's doing nothing, because Donald Trump is on TV every day, whether he's allegedly raping somebody or trying to overthrow the federal government, but it's on TV. So all the good things that she's doing is not being broadcast. And but the only thing I would say, Pierre, I guess he endorsed a candidate on the show, but I encourage everybody to actually look at the background of each candidate. And I do that before I cast a vote. I see whether or not the person who's running for office, what have they done? What did they accomplish? And so when you look at accomplishments of the candidates, then you make a decision based on evidence, not just on race, gender, or otherwise, but on evidence of what they've accomplished, particularly for our community. And that's how I decide who to vote for. And I hope everybody become more involved in the process.
It should be, but the average person, particularly the younger voters, like I said, voting for the first time, they don't really know those ins and outs. Somebody has to tell them, and we, I think, have to do a better job in terms of being a referee, so to speak. Parties are doing, because the parties are going to look out for their interests. Independents have to look out for their interests.
Yeah. So I encourage everybody to get out there and vote and stuff. I have disagreement with politicians, but one of my disagreement was probably ill-conceived. The mayor decided to build the court system on the southeast side of Indy. And I thought that was a dumb idea at the time. And I thought that it should be downtown. But the problem is that I've been trying cases for many years. I tried 32 cases in Marion County Court during a 5-year time period and didn't have a single black on the jury panel. And I threatened to sue and things like that. And the reason being, African Americans weren't showing up downtown because of parking and, whatever reason, they didn't show up. And so we would do jury trials, and a lot of times they did show up, they didn't serve because they were doing everything to get off the panel. Now that's changed because we're on the southeast side. I've had the most African American in the jury pool that I've ever seen. And so I was wrong. The mayor was correct by building the Justice Center. Our Justice Center, where they're doing cases at now, is probably one of the best in the United States. I've done cases in maybe 18, 20 states, and nobody is even close to Indianapolis. We have the most incredible court system in our city now. It's just amazing. And I don't think that most people realize how grateful we are to have such a facility like that. And so now, I've done jury trials lately, and we're getting fair verdicts. Like last one, 10.5 million, one before that, $1 million. We had one, $2.4 million. And it can only be done when we have fair-minded people that shows up for jury duty and administer justice. And justice requires accountability. So I like to thank the people who plan that, because it's just a wonderful thing. Well, thank you for calling. Now we'll take the next caller. Roger, you have a question or comment for us?
Hey, how's it going? Hey, wonderful show, good information. I kind of disagree with the last caller. It's going to take the young people to change the city, because older people keep voting for the same people. I think we're going to go Republican dealing with the mayor. We need to change the city. We need all in order and clean up. Like as you said, it's a wonderful city, but leadership here just don't want to get it together. We have to get rid of this crime and these drugs. The city is becoming like New Jack City. We need a new leadership, and it's going to take the young people to clean it up, because our older people, they talk about go vote, but they've been voting for the same people for the last 30, 40 years in this city. It's time for a change. Thank you.
Well, okay, caller, I know you're off. Let me explain my position on this issue. We have a terrible issue in our community now. We have a lot of African-American males shooting other African-American males. But the reason that we had such an increase in violent crime is that we have the proliferation of guns in our community. Guns are accessible. See, it's not guns that kill people, it's people pulling the trigger, right? But you make the guns accessible to everyone, kids, teenagers, young folks, and you can get guns everywhere. We don't have background checks. You can carry weapons wherever you want to carry weapons. And so that's led to a dramatic increase. America has 3% of the world's population, but we're 51% of private gun ownership. So when you say Republicans are the problem, actually, Republicans is how we increase mass shooting in America. Let me explain this to you, folks. Before Donald Trump took office under Obama, I think the last year we had 280 some mass shooting. When Trump took office, they had this big Second Amendment. We had 600 some mass shooting. So the mass killing in America, folks, increased under Republican leadership, not Democrats. And so when the caller said that Republican, he's just dead wrong. There's no statistic evidence that he has that proves that point. It's just the opposite. So I want to make sure that you don't spread misinformation, because it's not the Democrats, it's these idiotic gun laws. We had the NRA in the city of Indianapolis at a convention, and what they're espousing, more guns. So the things that are killing people in our community, they're saying create more opportunities for people to get these weapons of mass destruction. And so we have to get the guns out of the hands of these kids. Folks, we have kids killing kids because they have the availability of these weapons. And so make no mistake about that. That's not a Democrat issue. That's these Republicans pushing for gun ownership. We have too many guns. And so I want to get that insane notion out your mind. You can't blame people in office for these guns. The Democrats have been fighting against this. Now we had to call us, blame Democrats for something that Republican created. And I can't let you get away with that, because you're just dead wrong, sir. Dead wrong. You look at the statistic, mass shooting, you'll see that the dramatic increase from Obama to Trump. It's just startling. And that's a matter of messaging. People are receiving misinformation, and somebody is spreading that stuff without checking the facts. The fact is that increased dramatically under Republican leadership, not Democrats. In any event, folks, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank each and every one of you, our callers. I know we have a lot of folks still on the line. I'm sorry we can't talk to you. We'll talk to you next Saturday. Thank you all, and thank our producer and all the wonderful people that calls in, our audience all over the country. Thank you, and may God bless and keep you until next Saturday. Take care, folks.